I've always been very inspired by the sacred cow, because if you look at the artwork on the cow in India, she literally embodies the cosmos, every part of her. She's called Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth. And the part I really love about the cow is the cow dung. And so when Time magazine decided to identify me as one of the 10 environmental heroes of the century, it was just before the Johannesburg summit. It's 10 years after the Earth Summit in Rio. And then, you know, they had sent people to study Navdanya and what we're really doing, and they saw our practices, they saw our farms, and they saw we were producing more food through ecological methods. And so the write-up on me had a final paragraph that the biotech industry needs to take some lessons from me and Navdanya. And that made Monsanto so mad that they sent one of their PR people in India. You know who the PR people are, because they're always on the other side of the debate. They're always pushing the Monsanto point of view. And we were having a press conference at Johannesburg, and lots of journalists. And then a hand came through with what I thought was cow dung. And I said, oh, an organic farmer has brought me cow dung because of my love for cow dung. And this person who I know from India as a PR man of the biotech industry says, no, it's the bullshit award for making the world starve with organic. So I said, well, it's still cow dung. And it'll still make good compost. And thank you so much. So, you know, what is it that a sacred cow tells us? It tells us about a worldview in which humanity is part of the extended family of the earth. You know, I think one of the exercises that would be wonderful for the students would be to rewrite that Declaration of Independence as a declaration of independence for all life on earth, for all species. It would be fun. At one level, we've actually done that. We've done a universal declaration on the rights of Mother Earth. Because you might recall the Copenhagen summit was totally subverted. This is where everyone thought we'd have big breakthroughs on the issue of climate change. And the Nobel Peace Committee even gave poor President Obama a Nobel Peace Prize, thinking this will edge him on to deliver more. And instead he came and just, you know, worked with 5 other countries, India, China, Brazil, South Africa, and they brought out this Copenhagen Accord, which basically said no legal treaty anymore. All polluters will have voluntary emission reductions. And then President Obama had a press conference. So here are all the delegates from all the countries, presidents, prime ministers, sitting and negotiating. And then they suddenly see on the screen President Obama saying, we've concluded a Copenhagen Accord. And everyone says, but what were we here for? So Evo Morales of Bolivia, who is an indigenous person, and he came through in leadership because Bolivia had had this amazing movement against the privatization of water. The World Bank had pushed the privatization, Bechtel had got the contract, and the prices of water shot up 6 times. When people tried to do rainwater harvesting, they were told, no, you can't do that. When women tried to pull water from their wells, they were told even that is ours. You have to buy the water. And then people took to the streets. That entire turmoil changed the politics of Bolivia, created a presidency under an indigenous person. And Evo Morales got up. And there were tremendous speeches made at that time. But Evo Morales gets up and says, we had gathered to defend the earth, not to defend the rights of the polluters. And if this platform is failing, I'm going to create a platform in Bolivia, and I'll invite all movements and interested governments to work together on the rights of Mother Earth and climate change. And that's what happened as part of the core group involved in promoting that declaration. And the idea is, you know, we've had the declaration that is the Declaration of Independence. There's the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights. And many of us deeply feel we need to expand the scope of freedom to take into account the freedom of all beings. And that, to me, is what making peace with the earth is about. I once saw a paper about the expanding zone of freedom. But it was really about the shrinkage. It was about the fact that we went from 300 million species who are part of the Earth family, and in India we actually have a beautiful word for this. We call it Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the family of the Earth. And the trees are part of that family, and the earthworms are part of that family, and the elephants and the cows are all part of that family. It's a horizontal relationship of all species. You got to shrink it, you put the human being there. Then you say, no, that's not good enough. Some human beings, if they're women, if they're colored, they're not human enough. And of course, we've got the absurdity of today's world, where the only human being who is a real citizen is a corporation. The only person who counts, who has a personhood that matters, is the corporation. And both because I work on the kind of issues where you feel on a daily basis the impacts, but also because I do care about how we formulate our worldviews. I think something's gone very wrong when we discount the subjecthood of life on earth, the subjecthood and sovereignty of people, and replace it with the sovereignty of a fiction. Because a corporation is a fiction. On a piece of paper, you say this is a legal person. You can't pinch that person. The person won't die. At best, they go bankrupt, and then they get bailed out. So they still don't die. And it's this double capacity that has evolved in the last few centuries. The capacity on the one hand of separation and division. We say we're not part of the earth. The earth is dead matter. We are not part of a humanity. There's only a very, very privileged definition of what being human is about. If you read colonial texts, it's quite amazing. Indians, if you look at the sketches that were made about India, we had heads of buffaloes and heads of cows. Because we respected the sacred cow, we became the cow. Native Americans were considered not being fully human because they did not hold the bison captive. That was the criteria. Yeah? You did not imprison the bison, and real human beings keep their animals in prisons. And the Aboriginals weren't part of the fauna and flora, and that was technically the language used till very recently. They were part of the fauna and flora of Australia because they weren't growing apples. That's in the legal text. And then the legal rights framework was developed with the idea of terra nullius, empty land. Since they are not human beings, they have no rights. And therefore, that land that they occupy is empty, and we can take it for the betterment of the land and for our betterment too. And that was the ground of colonialism. So it was both a separation from the earth, but a separation among people, a denial of the humanity to certain groups of people. And then was simultaneously the rise of the rule of abstracts. In science, the abstractions of mass as the first quality, the only reliable quality, primary quality. And the real things that tell you, they tell you whether a fish is rotten or not. It stinks. The quality of smell, the quality of touch. I mean, what could be a deeper knowing than the loving touch between people? It's subjecthood, it's illusion, it doesn't count. So bit by bit, we move down the road to abstraction. And I just had a class where one of the students was asking about the emergence of the new synthetic biology, and the language they use is bio-bricks. First they talked about the atoms of the plant, which they then defined as genes, and then you had the Watson and Crick's. But now you have bricks, as if life is a building like this. You can dismantle it and put it together. Life is much more complex. Life self-organizes. Everything is related in life. And of course, if in science you have that mechanistic reduction leading to abstraction ruling over reality, in economics you've had other abstractions. The first abstraction was the idea of growth. To mobilize resources for the war, the category of growth was created. And growth basically says, if you produce what you consume, you're not producing. So nature produces what she consumes in the amazing cycles, whether it's the hydrological cycle that makes water available forever, or it's the nutrient cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the carbon cycle. None of it is producing anything. Women slog away this, 70 to 80% of the planet's work. They don't work. The farmers who produce even today 70 to 75% of the food eaten on the planet, the small farmers who are not part of the commodity system of production, they don't produce because they're eating what they grow. So if you produce what you consume, you don't produce, then you get growth. Growth ultimately is measuring the flow of cash. And it's not measuring how that increased flow is leading to a decline, both in human well-being and the health of the planet. So you cut a forest, you get growth. You nurture a forest, there's growth of the forest, but there's no growth in the economy. You have healthy children, there's no growth. You eat them, feed them junk, get them to have diabetes at 7 years old. Tremendous growth. Growth first for McDonald's and Coca-Cola and Pepsi, and then growth for the drug industry, which has a lifetime of selling. And then, of course, this construction goes on. In 2008, what was it about? It was about brilliant people creating instruments of speculation on Wall Street. And that became the economy. Derivatives, collateral debt obligations, securitization. Where you go further away from reality, it's considered securitization. And then the subprime crisis burst, and nobody knew, A, how it had happened, and 2, how to fix it. So the two challenges, I believe, that we have are overcoming separation. And in the context of our relationship with the earth, that separation is leading to an ecological apartheid. The very word apartheid means to separate. In South Africa, it was to separate the races. And many people are not aware that the first time Gandhi practiced civil disobedience was on a September 11th, 1901. We call it the other September 11th, where he refused to wear the badges of identity on the basis of race and said, we are one people, we will not be divided by race, and refused to cooperate with the laws on carrying your identity badge. I'm black, I'm Indian, I'm white. And I think the second challenge we have is to really come down to reality again. Because abstractions work wonderfully as measures of control and measures of domination. And real relationships work beautifully in terms of cultivating freedom for all. One of the deepest separations is the way two words that are both rooted in one term, oikos, our home, this planet, have gone in such divergent paths. Ecology was supposed to be the science of the household, derived from oikos. Economy was supposed to be the management of the household, also derived from oikos. But economy today has no idea about the household. It has no idea about the planet. It has absolutely no idea about how people live and die. And what is the status of the planet? What's the health of the planet? And food provides such a powerful prism to understand what's going on. So if you look at the ecological side of it, 75% of all biodiversity loss has taken place in the last few decades as industrial agriculture has spread. The United Nations did a conference in 1995, and I was there, it was in Leipzig, Germany, on plant genetic resources. Country after country brought out these graphs of the loss of diversity. And as monocultures replaced local food systems, 75% of diversity gone, forever, never going to come back. 70% or more of the water on this planet is being used for industrial farming systems and chemical farming systems. If you do ecological agriculture, in India we have what we call irrigated farming and rain-fed farming. And rain-fed farming can even take place in the desert. The western part of India is a desert of Rajasthan. They get a few inches of rain a day, in the year. They have systems of conserving every drop and getting a harvest. So it isn't the case that without irrigation you can't have food. But without irrigation you can't have chemical cultivation. You need the water. 75% water is then getting used, but what comes out is then destroying the rest. Because what comes out is loaded with pesticides and fertilizers. And the fertilizer runoff is leading to a phenomena that is expanding. If you look at these maps of what are called dead zones in the oceans, it's just growing by the day. The pesticides in the water. You know, the farmers first get cancer because they spray, and then they get cancer because they're drinking the water, where all the pesticides have accumulated. In my assessment, more than 75% of the soil and land degradation on the planet is taking place because of industrial methods of farming. And earlier we were talking about the Dust Bowl. The planet's becoming a dust bowl. I mean, we know everything, all the science is there. If you use mechanization, you use monocultures, you're going to transform soil into dust. Because what organic farming does is build the soil, it binds the soil into aggregates. And you can have the rain, it won't wash off, you can have the wind and it sits there. So nature's economy, as I call it, is being seriously depleted. And then people's economy is being seriously depleted. 1 billion people without food. Another 2 billion with stuff I would not call food. I actually go further and say it's anti-food. Because food is supposed to be about nourishing us. Food becomes what we are. It's the cells that our body is, the bones, the blood. Food is making all of that all the time. And if it's not food, and if it's anti-food, then it's damaging the cells. It's not matching with the living processes that our body needs. Very, very severe levels of deepening of poverty. Now, if you only measure growth in terms of the commercial flow, then if more farmers are buying more seeds, more pesticides, more fertilizers, there's growth taking place in the economy. But if more farmers are becoming dependent on purchased seed that's non-renewable every year, seeds that need chemicals, fertilizers, pesticides because you get more attacks of pests, what is not mentioned is the farmer actually gets poorer because the money for those inputs is leaving the farm. So when people say people leave the farm, I to date have not met a single farmer who says, I want to leave this land. I will vote with my feet against the earth. Every farmer I know who has left the land has faced a foreclosure, all related to debt because of these costly inputs. And we've evolved an amazing system of the economy in which the earth and people are constantly paying the price. And those who make money at their cost never have to pay the price. So if a crop fails, you sell more pesticides if there's a pest attack. If the rain wasn't there and your crop needed irrigation, doesn't matter, you sell another time. I once traveled to, I think it was 1984, and it was the big drought in the Horn of Africa, and I was going to Ethiopia. And next to me was a person who was also going to Ethiopia. I was flying from the UNEP headquarters, and he asked me what I was going for, and I was just saying to get a sense of what happens. And I asked him what he was going for. He was from Pioneer. And he said to sell seeds, hybrid seeds. I said, but hybrid seeds in a year of drought is risky. I mean, they won't have a crop. And he says, for us, that's fine. We'll just sell more. So an ecological failure and a social failure translates into commercial success. There's always another market. I mean, one of the things I had to deal with Monsanto was, someone leaked this to me from Monsanto. It was their sustainability plan. And their line said, water is disappearing, what remains is polluted, everyone needs water, so selling water will be a sustainable business. So sustainability meant constantly be able to sell, and that's what they've done with seed. Sustainable seed normally would be a seed that you can grow, the best seed you can save, it multiplies, you can exchange, you're never poorer because seed never runs out. When there was a war between the Gorkhas and the people of our area, the Garhwalis, people died. People died of hunger because they couldn't farm, they couldn't, But every seed container was full. Nobody had touched the seed because seed is for maintaining the future. And it's all right to sacrifice yourself today so that the future can be secured. So this converting of something that is by its very nature creates abundance, multiplication, renewal. That has been defined as a problem, that seeds renew, that farmers save seeds. So now this has been defined as a crime, intellectual property crime, saving seeds. The WTO has rules called the intellectual property laws, the Agreement on Trade-Related Intellectual Property Rights. And Monsanto in 1995, when WTO came into force, a representative called James Enyart at a conference in Washington said, in writing this treaty, we've achieved something unprecedented. We defined a problem, we offered the solution. The problem for them, and we were the patient, diagnostician, physician, all in one. The problem they defined was that farmers save seed. And the solution they've offered was it should be illegal for them to save seeds. And they've tried their hardest to both create laws to prevent farmers from saving seed and evolve technologies to prevent farmers from saving seeds. So things like the Terminator technology are designed to not give you seed, to make seed sterile. And things like patent laws are designed to make it impossible for farmers to have seed and save seeds. This is a very, very important case. I mean, there are many important cases all over the world. I fight. I think I take one case a year on Monsanto. I'm dealing with one case. It's an antitrust case where Monsanto, talking about abstraction and the rule of abstraction, they made the seed disappear. They call it the technology trait that is their creation. And therefore, they need to collect the royalties. So part of what has happened in India is Monsanto entered the seed supply in cotton. And I sued them in 98. They couldn't sell the BT cotton till 2002, but they started to take over the seed supply, buy up the Indian companies, push the hybrids. The price of seed jumped 8,000%. And the seed actually, I mean, this BT actually led to new pests, new aphids and jacids and army bugs and mealybugs. And the bollworm which had come with the American hybrid, it's called the American bollworm, it became a major pest in cotton. So now they said, no, we'll have the boll guard, the trademark for BT cotton, to stop the bollworm. But the bollworm is now resistant. So now they have boll guard too. And, Einstein, I mean, my two big inspirations are Gandhi and Einstein. And Einstein said that a clear sign of insanity is to keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome. Now, if Bolgard 1 has failed, one gene has failed, to put two toxic genes and expect something else than a treadmill is, according to Einstein, an example of insanity. But that insanity still works because you can charge a higher royalty. The royalty flow is 10 billion rupees per year on cotton alone from India. We managed to stop Monsanto from moving into other crops. We had a big movement to stop the introduction of a BT eggplant, the BT brinjal. We have 4,000 varieties of eggplant. We had 1,500 varieties of cotton. Today in the market, there's only BT cotton. And that's why we save seeds, so that we can have alternatives. Now, the high rates of expenditure on chemicals and pesticides have pushed farmers into debt. And they know, farmers are smart enough to know this debt is not payable. And we are seeing something that we've never experienced in my country before, an epidemic of farmer suicides. You've had suicides of farmers. But we're now having an epidemic of farmer suicides. And the figure in the last 15 years, since the whole seed supply became a monopoly in cotton, and most of the suicides are in the cotton belt, the figure is 250,000 farmers. And these are government figures, they're official figures. What our work is to go into the field and actually talk to the people, to actually verify, to see why did this person commit suicide. It's always related to debt for chemicals and seeds. And wherever farmers aren't dependent on purchased chemicals and purchased seed, no debt. Not a single organic farmer who works with us has debt. Why should they? Because they're not buying anything. And if you don't have debt, why would you end your life? And of course, the double tragedy is that in other languages, pesticide is called the medicine. In Hindi, it's called dawai. And yet the farmers know, because when they have to end their lives, they drink pesticide. 99% of all the studies we've done on farmer suicides are drinking pesticide. And it's usually on the day the land is being taken by the creditors. And the creditors are the agents of the seed and chemical companies. And the farmer will go to the field because the field is their mother. And drink pesticide. Usually the wife has no idea. They have no idea that this particular cotton seed has got them into debt. Because he just signed away the land. There was no money to pay. And I visited a widow soon after she'd lost her husband. And I asked her, I said, what did he get into debt for? And she pointed to this box above the fireplace. And I said, can I pull it down? And I pulled it down. There must have been about 60 packages all with different names of Indian companies. But in the corner was this little logo called Bolgard, which basically means property of Monsanto. So 60 Indian companies are locked into licensing arrangements. They can't sell anything else. And the poor farmer says, oh, I bought this from Mahiko. That failed, I bought it from Mahalakshmi. That fails. He thinks he's changing companies. But he's not changing the company because there's one company. And in effect, what we are seeing is one level beyond slavery. It's fascinating. You've got a whole display out there about books on slavery and just being up to Monticello and how there was an age of prosperity for this country built on not taking into account the real labor that made it all work. But I think we're moving beyond slavery into what I would call disposability. The idea that certain people are disposable. And the idea that certain parts of nature are disposable. That, I believe, is the real challenge we face. And at one level, I'm so grateful to the Occupy movement. Because I'm really a believer in numbers. And I think the fact that they just said 1%, 99%, it's probably a leapfrogging on economic lessons of a kind that thousands of academic papers couldn't have brought us to. Just that very simple 1% and the 99%. And the beauty of it is many of the people who claim they are part of the 99% are not yet there. But they know through solidarity, if we don't work with the excluded today, we'll be part of the excluded tomorrow. So in making peace with the earth for me is making peace among humans too. Because the war against the earth that begins in our minds is a war against people. The two go hand in hand. Another very, very important lesson I've drawn from Einstein is when he said, you cannot solve the problems you face using the mindset that caused them. And the problem is so much of what is being offered as a solution in today's context of the economic crisis following the 2008 financial collapse. And, even though there's been a huge bailout here, I go to Europe a lot, I advise government. I'm an advisor to Zapatero, who was Prime Minister of Spain till recently. I'm still on his think tank. But they didn't want the kind of policies they've been forced to undertake under the new structural adjustment that they're facing. Everyone thought structural adjustment comes to the third world. It's now in Greece, in Portugal, in Spain, in Italy. And normally, what you're asked to do is privatize your public goods and assets, give up your pensions, give up your unemployment. And in Italy, because so many of my friends are professors, you don't employ new faculty. Just let the universities die. In the area of agriculture, if the Green Revolution, which is the name given to industrial chemical agriculture, which is where my work on agriculture began, it's been followed up with genetic engineering, often called the second Green Revolution, but applying the same mindset of fragmentation, of reductionism, of intensive input, of dependence, of not worrying about what you're doing to the soil, to the seed, to the biodiversity, to the water. And now we've got synthetic biology. I would call it the third Green Revolution. And if you just scratch a bit on the synthetic biology, you find two things. First, they talk about food, but they end up in biofuel. All the research projects are about biofuel. And they talk about efficiency, and they land up in Africa for land grab. Because all of that will need to be grown somewhere. And the land grab of Africa is, we have a land grab in India. You can't keep building new mines to mine iron ore, or iron ore that's then sent off to China. All our cotton is sent off to China. So the old colonial model of countries becoming producers of raw material and never of the finished good, is in a way being reinstated. And part of what we've done through Navdanya, the movement I started in '87 to deal with the monopolies on seed and genetic engineering, we've created, I had counted 66, but my colleagues say we are up to 80 community seed banks to reclaim the commons. So that seed is available. First, the seed is free to reproduce, so it's the freedom of the seed, and then it's available to be shared, so it's the freedom of the farmer. And we call this Beej Swaraj, seed freedom. Our work on building Earth democracy is based on 5 freedoms, and each of them is both a freedom for the Earth and a freedom for people who depend on the Earth. The first is the seed freedom, food freedom, land and soil freedom. So it's freedom of people to be on the land. In India, the challenge is they're being uprooted for land grab. I think in countries like the US, it's a question of getting access to land again in creative, innovative ways. And so here, glad to hear from a friend who's created an alternative investment system called Slow Money. And they are making money available to help young people to become farmers with a slow return. Then we have the freedom of the forest, and we have the freedom of water. So the freedom of water is to let the rivers run. Because, for example, the Ganges is being dammed 500 places. She can't survive it. Very big campaign in India on the freedom of the river to flow clean and free. And we're connecting this to all our cultural beliefs. Of course, while on the one hand, movements like ours are building an Earth democracy, the old mindset is in a habit. It's got a momentum, it's got an inertia, it doesn't know how to stop. And 2 of the things that really entertain me a lot is one, how the entire system of commodification has left us in a total mess. You commodified food, you made people hungry. You commodified water, you left people in thirst. And instead of stepping back and saying, let the commons be resurrected, those who commodified 1 or 2 aspects of nature are now saying, let's commodify the rest of nature. And at Rio, at the Earth Summit in June, the big debate is going to be the new convergence of the oil industry, the biotech industry, the agribusiness industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the chemical industry, converging into what we are now calling the green economy, which is using all life on Earth as feedstock to reproduce the oil economy, which they know will sooner or later run out, with peak oil and the end of the fossil fuel age. They're talking about how 75% of the biomass on the planet isn't used. Of course it's used. It's used by nature for her cycles. It's used by women. It's used by the animals. It's used by the cow. And if you take every bit of straw and put it into a power plant, and if you take every acre of land and put it in under biofuel cultivation, you're going to deepen the poverty and hunger crisis at a rate that we have not imagined. And it will, in my view, totally disrupt our ability to live together as society and community. It will lead to, I mean, you've seen the images. You've seen the images of what happens when Northern Sudan and Southern Sudan start to fight. You've seen the images of what happens when conflicts go beyond the control of people. And you can just extrapolate to see what would happen with this. It would lead to a very, very large scale human genocide. And that is why I say we've got to have the real green economy. And the real green economy can only be based on respecting the rights of all of the Earth species and respecting the rights of the last human being. The other thing that's coming up in climate change is, first we had emissions trading, allow the polluters to buy up someone else's clean air. It's like the Catholic Church used to have these, what is it called? Indulgences. Yeah? You can continue to sin as long as you bribe me. Just pay something. Give me an indulgence. I mean, it's the same. Let the polluters keep polluting, but buy a credit from somewhere else. And now, some of the biggest funding is going to geoengineering. Geoengineering, like putting mirrors in the sky to reflect the sunlight back, or create artificial volcanoes so that there is pollution in the air and the sun just doesn't shine, so they say you'll have global cooling. Many of them are physicists. And yeah, they actually have experiments we've stopped through mobilization of taking pollutants and putting them in the higher reaches of the atmosphere to do the same thing, to block the sun. But the sun was never the problem. The pollution was the problem. And when I have debates and I'll ask, so what will a blocked out sun do to our food security? What's going to happen to photosynthesis if the sun doesn't shine? That's not my department. My calculation is this much pollution will block out this much heat, and therefore there will not be accumulation of heat on the planet. Global warming, so solution is global cooling. That's why I refuse to use the word global warming. I talk climate chaos. We've disrupted the balancing forces of how climates get maintained. I believe this whole system has become so insane. It's becoming more and more obvious to more and more people. That's why you have an Occupy movement. That's why there's the Arab Spring. That is why you have in Spain the indignados, young people. They call themselves the indignados. M15, because they started on May the 15th. I think this is not working for us. We need something else. And then they write. I mean, they'll write to me. Out of the blue, I'll get a letter from Occupy. Out of the blue, I'll get a letter from M15. Basically saying, we know this is not working, and we want to do something else. We want to shape a world, and the two principles that are resonating around the world are principles of sustainability, which are bringing peace in our relationship with the earth, and principles of justice, which is bringing peace in our relationship with each other. And I think this is unstoppable. No matter how tough it looks, and no matter how powerful the corporations look, and no matter how blind our leaders look, I believe we are in a very, very exciting time of shaping not just another worldview, but another world, which I have called Earth democracy, living on this earth as democracy, democracy of all life, but an everyday democracy where we do shape the decisions of how our food is grown, what we eat, how our education is governed, how our health systems are governed, how our decision-making takes place. And I talk about Earth democracy as a constellation of the three living systems: living economies, living cultures, and living democracy. Because everyone's getting a bit frustrated with a democracy which is controlled through the freedom of speech of corporations, which your Supreme Court just recognized. In terms of, hijacking of democracy has been redefined as freedom of speech of a fictitious person. We need to reclaim that democracy. We need to reshape it. And we sit in a room right next to this amazing Declaration of Independence. It wasn't working then. And your founding fathers said, we'll make something else work. What says the British will decide our fate forever? And I say, what says the corporations will decide our fate forever? Thank you. We've won many cases against Monsanto in India. Europe, if it was left to the European Commission, they have a lot of lobbyists. There are 80 Monsanto lobbyists sitting in Brussels. So every time the European Commission tries to work on behalf of the lobbyists and push a decision, the movements push their governments back and say we won't accept it. So they've been trying to get rid of the bans on GMOs. But every time they try, they tried to do it through WTO. US tried to do it through WTO. Didn't work. They tried to do it through the European Commission, I think 4 years ago. It reinforced both the commitment of people, movements, and local regional government. There are 4 governments nationally, France, Austria, Switzerland. They had a referendum, and some of the big biotech companies are Swiss, and yet the people had a referendum, and they can't have GMOs. And we've done a report on the state of GMOs last year. It's called The GMO Emperor Has No Clothes. And it's basically taking the 4 claims: more production, so end of hunger; less chemicals, so end of toxics; better control of weeds and pests; and more nutrition. We've gone through, and we've done it in terms of people on the ground, the Argentinians writing the Argentinian chapter, Mexicans writing the Mexican chapter. Because normally the news you get of GMOs is Monsanto's ads. So yeah, the power of the lobbyists is huge, and the weakness of democracy is part of it. This is the reason I've created what I originally used to call the Seed University. Now we call it the Earth University, which is our ecological farm with biodiversity. We grow more than 1,000 crops. Some young person who's very fond of birds said, I want to see how many birds have come back to your farm. 66 species. On a chemical farm, you don't see a bird. Yeah? New species of mycorrhizae coming into the soil. Because the minute you do a non-violent farming, you're basically saying to diverse species, here's a sanctuary for you. Yeah? Let the butterflies and bees flourish. 70% bees gone. So we've started this Earth University. We do short courses. We welcome interns to come and stay and learn. And the learning is threefold. First is a learning from nature, because I think that's the biggest thing we lost. That we forgot that nature can be a teacher. Second, learning from people who actually do the stuff. Real farmers. Yeah? As Howard said, the pests and the peasants were my professors. And our community of farmers, it's amazing. Bija, it means the seed. She came to work and she wanted to get a job washing dishes. And in our home, we wash our own dishes. So we said, sorry. But I said, I'm saving seeds. Would you like to work with me? This 20 years ago. She said, yeah. And she's just gone too old and she's now retiring. But Bija is such a reservoir of knowledge. To be able to identify 680 kinds of rices, which is what we save on our farm. And then, of course, third is the learning from community. Because the way we build the school is really to not just cultivate good plants in biodiversity, but to cultivate community of caring. So I hope some of you will come. So, Russell had started this concept of independent tribunals because he realized that, when governments are that locked in his time on warmongering and nuclear warfare, they're not going to be the ones who say this is wrong. So he created the Russell tribunals. And these permanent people's tribunals that have come out of it have come out of Russell, but it's an Italian who took it on. And in Bangalore some months ago, they held a tribunal on the companies that produce the toxics in agriculture. And the chair of the jury of this People's Tribunal is a very, very eminent Indian jurist, Upendra Bakshi. He used to be the vice chancellor of the Delhi University and then was a professor in Warwick. And he had worked for years on the Bhopal disaster, which was a Union Carbide pesticide plant that leaked and killed thousands of people. The worst industrial disaster in the world. And Upendra is absolutely convinced that these are very serious crimes and these companies should be tried. I personally believe you have to do a lot of people's tribunals before governments wake up. And then some government will wake up. Like Bhutan has woken up to say growth is wrong. It's a wrong measure. We'll measure happiness. And they're shifting the ground. I mean, they're shifting the ground so fast. I have a little, this is something I should share with you. I really believe the seed issue is getting more intense. And the fact that the courts rule in favor of Monsanto, the government's work in favor of Monsanto. I'm building a global seed sovereignty, seed freedom campaign. And I was at the biggest organic trade fair that takes place in Nuremberg, and the city called me to speak in the town hall. And while speaking, someone asked a question, and it suddenly hit me. This is the place where they had the trials. And I said, you guys are going to hold a trial of the biotech industry, which is the toxic industry, it's the agrochemical industry. You've got to hold the Nuremberg trials. And I hope our friends, they will pick it up. But I think we need to do more and more of this. There is a movement now for trials on ecocide. I've been asked, I won't be able to go. At one of the universities in Cambridge or Oxford, they wanted me to come and be part of, sort of to be the lawyer for the earth in this ecocide trial. But I think we'll just have to do more and more of this. It's not just because I'm here as a guest with Bart as a historian. I think we often don't learn enough from history. I mean, if you kind of work from inside the slavery system, at that point, if someone said, we can end it, no, everyone would have said it's impossible. It'll be around forever. They're too powerful. They own us. And many, many things happened. And we saw an end to that system. So I think we have to do many creative things, inside institutions and outside institutions, to push this, because I really do believe the corporations, and sadly, only the criminal corporations are prospering. That is the tragedy of our economic system just now. The more criminal you can be, the fatter you are. But that's partly because your media is part of that corporate control. No, frankly, even the Indian papers didn't cover it. We knew only because we knew the people who were organizing. And because Upendra Bakshi sent me his fat deliberation. The control of some particular kinds of companies, the oil industry, Monsanto, the biotech industry, the chemical companies, their hold on censoring information is very, very strong. Because they've had so many years of experience, starting with Agent Orange, Dioxin, they've been shutting it all down for so long. They know how to pick up the phone and tell the editor, we'll sue you till we destroy you. Which means you just have to speak more and more, in more and more platforms, in more and more ways. And the young people have found so many new ways, which people like me are still trying to figure out. How do you do social media?